Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters. Sulky, express yourself with Sulky and create with confidence. Brother, it's so easy with Brother at your side. And Quilt Cut, easy fabric cutting for quilters. Hi, welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Carpetras, and we are here at International Quilt Market in Houston on the exhibition floor. We had the opportunity to sit down with Karey Bresenhan and Nancy O'Brien Puentes, who are the driving forces behind Quilt Market and Quilt Festival. They're also fifth generation Texan quilters and first cousins. Let's take a look.
I remember pictures of Great Granny, but that's really about all I recall. But we certainly inherited a love of quilts and quilting, starting with her.
Great Granny made both of us a quilt top, and then when we got married at different times, our grandmother pulled those quilt tops out of the quilt chest and had a family quilting bee to get them quilted. And I'm older, so mine was first, and then Nancy was second, but hers was uglier, and so Granny made her another one. You know, it was really quite unfair.
It was quite a haul, I thought. I got two bridal quilts, and Karey just got one, because my grandmother thought that the colors in my wedding quilt were not appropriate for a bride.
And they weren't.
They weren't.
Ugly.
They were men's shirting fabrics,
not really very
mainly.
Pretty. But mine was beautiful, so we had fun with that, and we learned to quilt in a family quilting bee that was set up to get, I believe it was my wedding quilt done.
Yes.
And I can remember at the end of the long quilting bee, my great Aunt Minnie, our great Aunt Minnie, turned to Granny and said, "You know, Ella, that girl's going to make a right fair quilter." And I thought I had just been handed a golden crown with a diamond in it, because that great Aunt Minnie was not given to compliments.
And that was a compliment, which I did not get, by the way.
You weren't up at that time. You
I
were
might
asleep.
have been asleep, yes.
I was the one that was still up. We were at the university, and we were due back in class at 8 o'clock in the morning, and this was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So Nancy was asleep with good sense. I was still quilting. Our granny taught us how to do that, and we saw the mothers, my mother and Nancy's mother, we saw them marking the quilt. They used cups and plates and saucers to get the design done. And
our great aunts were there.
Right. We had, I think, 7 or 8 great aunts that were around the quilting
It was wonderful.
frame. It was a very special time.
It was. And our grandmother put us right at the top of the quilt and told us, "Girls, take tiny stitches, because you're going to have to wake up every morning and look at them."
Now, I thought that was odd, because that was my wedding quilt.
Well, I'm sure I probably slept under it at some point, but
you probably did.
probably
actually.
did.
Not really a lot, because both of us were working so hard, there wasn't much time. And then when we picked it back up again, then we began to run quilting shows, and they took all of our time.
That became consuming.
And still pretty much does. I have a problem with quilting, because I find it very addictive. And if I sit down in the morning and start quilting something, it could be 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I'd still be in my nightgown quilting. And you know, this is not the way you can run a company.
The last quilt that we quilted on with our mothers, and Karey and I really put in very, very few stitches there, but it was Founder's Star, which is now the emblem quilt for the Texas Quilt Museum.
Back in the day, when there was the women's movement, I got bitten by the political bug. I thought there were a lot of things that were being done that were wrong, and that maybe I could help do something about. And so I decided to run for the state legislature, for the Texas legislature.
Not a good idea.
Not a great idea, right. But I ran, and to finance my campaign, because as a woman, I didn't have access to traditional sources of political revenue, you know, donations. And so instead I had quilt and antique sales in all my friends' homes. And so we had like annexes of people in all over the place instead of just in my district. They were even in Victoria and in Austin and San Antonio and all over, that we had people who wanted. And so most of them wanted the quilts. So when I lost, or rather when I understand one time it was said, when the voters saw fit to retire me before I ever took office, then I had this problem of a huge debt I had to pay back. And so I decided to open the store. I didn't know that you couldn't do that, and so I did it. You know, no one today would tell you to open a store to pay back a debt. They just
no, that's not even good sense.
But I did it, and didn't go into a regular store for over a year because I was plowing every penny I had into paying back what I owed.
Actually, you were plowing an awful lot of money into odor neutralizers in that first shop.
The skunk.
It
2
was a
drops
former
deodorize the skunk.
pet store.
And it smelled so bad.
Yes.
Oh, Lord, it smelled so bad.
It was dreadful.
And I found this product called 2 Drops Deodorize a Skunk. I bought all the bottles of it I could find, the little bitty bottles.
Yes, they were.
And I would tie a bandana around my nose, and then I would race as far to the back as I could, and I'd empty a whole bottle. 2 drops deodorize a skunk, this is what they said. And I went through all the bottles, and it got to finally where you actually could breathe.
It was bearable.
And then we tore out all the carpet and had to replace it. And I didn't have any money, so I replaced it with old carpet that had been torn out of a furniture store, and it had nails all in it. So we kind of went from the skunk to nails. It was a challenge.
But it was a very large shop too, which was it posed another problem because Karey didn't have enough inventory to fill it. And so she raided the family's quilts and hung those around to fill up the spaces. And then, of course, nobody wanted the inventory, they wanted the quilts.
And Howard Hughes wouldn't have had enough money for me to sell a quilt to him. I mean, I just wouldn't have done it.
Certainly not a family quilt.
A family quilt. And but I was really lucky because my mother had married with the old tradition of 13 quilts, and she married a man whose mother believed that idle hands were the devil's workshop. And so Gran Patterson had made each of her boys 13 quilts. So Mama married with a bunch of quilts, and then I had access to those to hang in various places to hide the fact that I had no inventory. Well, we actually started with the fabric. I started with my mother's stash, which I cut up into little pieces and put them in baggies, and they might have been 25 cents or 35 cents or 50 cents or whatever, but I didn't have to go out and buy that fabric, you see, even wholesale. I had no money.
And my aunt had an enormous stash of fabric, so this lasted quite a while.
Then after my first year in business as Great Expectations Quilts, I decided that I needed to do something to say thank you to the city of Houston for a successful first year. So we held the first Quilt Festival and brought in beautiful quilts that we had a couple that we knew that were up in Ohio or Iowa.
Ohio, I believe. I think they started in Ohio.
And we had them come in and bring their quilts, and we put them all over, and we had this big sale. And
it was astonishing.
It was.
Actually, I have to say that the quilts that we saw at that time were beautiful quilts that most of us had never seen before. We were used to 30s era Depression type quilts, and these were antique Amish quilts, beautiful, stunning quilts. And
19th century calicos. Oh, they were so beautiful.
They were incredible.
And so well priced. I believe you bought several.
I bought many, as many as I could, and I put a bunch in layaway. And looking back on it, I should have taken out a loan and bought a lot more.
But it was a very successful event. And then on the Saturday afternoon, I noticed that this young couple was going around pulling down quilts. And I said, wait, stop, the sale's not over yet. And they said, Karey, if we don't take these down, we're going to Dallas to do the same thing. We won't have anything to sell in Dallas. I said, well, that's Dallas's problem.
Houstonians really fell in love with those quilts. They were like we were. We had not seen quilts like that.
No, they were gorgeous.
So they were stunning.
I don't think that's necessarily correct that it was a regional thing.
It was more a family thing. Our family quilts were primarily...
But maybe we didn't see as many 19th century quilts in Texas because we were still fighting Indians. True. You know, so whereas in the northern part of the country, life was settled, you know. Life didn't settle down here till a long time after that.
It's still not settled.
That's right. For many years, I had to change my life every 5 years or I got bored beyond words.
I thought it was 7.
No, it was 5. It really was 5. And so 5 years after I started market, I started festival. 5 years after that, we started European shows. So I don't do the 5 years anymore, but I tend to write, books kind of come in there in those 5 years periods. So, but market came about actually because there was a friend of mine who, an older woman, she would call me every Sunday morning about 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Bad idea for her.
She would call me every Sunday morning about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and Florence was just enamored of our quilt festivals, and she exhibited in them, and she kept saying, Karey, you have got to run a market. I didn't even know what a market was, but Florence had been in business a lot longer than I had, and she knew what a market was, and she kept saying, you really have to do this. And then one time at festival, there was another woman who came up and said, you've really got to run a market. Why don't you go to AHSA and see what they do? And I said, what's that? I didn't even know that much. I had just started this business, you see, out of nowhere. So we ended up finding out what a wholesale trade show was and then setting one up, and discovered that one of the main reasons that the quilt shops wanted us to run a market was because they could not buy yellow. They had no access to the color yellow in fabric.
And very little access to cottons. They had a lot of access to polyester. And blends like that.
But you know, you think about it back then, how could you make an applique quilt of a flower without yellow? It would be virtually impossible because the yellow is everywhere with flowers, you know. So we started the market, and it was a big success. I do remember one time at the very beginning of the very first show, I didn't have the money to pay for a lot of staff. We just didn't have it. So it was sort of like you do everything. And I had just made the last trek through the thing, picking up all the trash. So I came back out where there was this long line of people waiting to get in the show, and I had my trash. And this man comes up to me with his briefcase and his white patent leather shoes, and he says, who are all these women? I said, those women, sir, are your customers. And that was how we started.
It was an educational process for a lot of the companies and company reps.
Because they really didn't know what a quilt store was.
They were not used to dealing with women in business.
My brother-in-law comes to every festival. And every festival, Charlie comes up to me and says the exact same words. And if he's watching this, I don't want to discourage him because they're nice words, but he'll come and he'll go, Karey, these aren't quilts, these are art. And I'm thinking,
new discovery every year.
By now, Charlie, you should know that. But he means it as a compliment, and it is a compliment. They are art. I don't care if you're looking at a wonderful 19th century log cabin or a brand new art quilt today. The quilts are art.
And it's an art form that women have controlled in all of its various guises, from being makers of it, to being the critics of it, to being the people who taught it and spread it and shared it. So it is unique in that regard.
I had a great time sitting down with Nancy and Karey. They had so much to share with us. In our next episode, we're going to hear more about when they expanded International Quilt Festival to Europe. We hope you join us. See you next time. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters. Sulky, express yourself with Sulky and create with confidence. Brother, it's so easy with Brother at your side. And Quilt Cut, easy fabric cutting for quilters.